everyone, welcome back to Wonderland TCG. My name is Neko Wonderland, and today I have with me Riley,
Hello.
Ring,
Hello.
and Bones.
Glad to be here.
And today we are going to be discussing a kind of cool aspect of CDH. We're going to be talking about the player aspect of the game, really homing in on the social interactions, the politics of the game. For this event, we are going to be looking at it as if it were a tournament setting. So, for example, when we discuss politics, we are going to look at it as you are at an actual event. This is a tournament where there are stakes on the line. And I thought it would be kind of fun to start out to give each of my friends here questions to set the mood. I have 4 questions. They're just going to give their initial yes/no answer, and we'll expand on it more as the episode continues. As we're going, feel free to put down what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear what your answers are and your reasoning behind them. So, my first question is going to be, do you use Pact of Negation on a spell if you don't have the ability to pay for it on your upkeep?
No.
I would not now.
Yeah, I don't either.
Awesome. Okay. Next. Would you lie in order to win a game?
Sometimes. Depends on the lie.
100%. Absolutely.
I personally do not. No.
Okay. Next question. If a player attacks you and they have you dead on board, would you still block one of their creatures in order to kill it before you die to combat damage?
Yes.
Always.
Depends on the situation. I know that's not a clear-cut yes or no, but typically no.
Last question. Would you focus down another player, even if they are not the threat, to stop them from winning the game to help you overall in the standings of a tournament?
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, as you might have figured out, those questions are kind of nuanced, and there are multiple ways to look at them. I'm sure each of you listening have your own opinions on them, and I'd love to hear what they are. CDH at its core is a social game, more so than other formats. You're interacting with 3 other people as opposed to 1, and you are navigating a difficult player landscape. Would others agree with that?
Yeah, I think how you talk to people and how you but how you navigate communication within your bot is very important, even within tournament EDH, especially within tournament EDH, to be honest. Yeah, communication is a tool. It's a very important strategic tool that you should be utilizing.
I think if you're not talking during a game of EDH, or especially CEDH, you're just leaving percentage points on the table and losing more games than you should.
It is difficult to know how to talk to the table because if you say too much or if people catch on that you're trying to be sneaky, then it's just going to ruin everything you're trying to do. There is some skill in communication.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And kind of those players you see get consistent results, some of the big names in the CDH community, especially the tournament scene, can play that social game really well. And the social game is not even how you talk to your opponents, it's how you present yourself. Because the moment you sit down at a CDH table, people are already forming opinions about you, same as in regular life. Just by looking at you, they're checking you out by the commander you're playing, and they're forming these opinions. So how you can conduct yourself in a game will either confirm or rebuke those biases or opinions that they might have. And when you just sit down at a table and kind of act friendly, that can set a lot of people at ease. Just coming down and be like, how are you doing? How was your last round? Putting people at ease can really get you ahead even before the first mulligan takes place.
Somewhere in that vein, a lot of the time, I like to try to establish us as the pod as a team working together to both win the game and not lose the game. Doing so kind of allows players to be more willing to cooperate with you, especially if you start using language like we, us, as in we need to stop this player from going off. We can't lose. All of us are not going to get to a next turn if we don't stop this. Things like that can go a long way to both making people more inclined to listen to you and also make it so that it's less likely for a arch enemy to appear.
Getting that camaraderie and even helping or kind of tricking people into thinking that there is an arch enemy, especially if there's something on the table like a turbo deck where you can sit down and be like, okay, we all have to agree to stop this player because if we don't, they're going to win on turn 2.
Yeah, exactly. Helps with deflecting a lot as well from what you're doing yourself.
And that kind of brings us into our first topic of social interactions that we are really going to dive deep into, and that's the politics of CEDH. So, to start, at least the way I look at it, there are 3 main forms of politicking in this game. The first I would call directing or redirecting, and that's when you, as a player, either subvertly or overtly, point your opponents in the direction of something to take attention off yourself or identify a legitimate threat. This could be something to actually help the table or something just to help yourself. It could be something as simple as, oh, that's a Ristic study? Oh, we can't let that resolve. That's too good. Kind of tricking your opponents to want to counter it. The second one is the deal making, where you work with usually one other player to form some sort of agreement to benefit both of you, ideally helping you out more, one way or another. This could be, if you give me that wish call talisman, I'll just tutor up a land or a mana rock. And then the last one, and probably the most unpopular in terms of politics, is the ultimatum or the threat. It's when a player goes to do something and you basically say, if you do this to me, I am going to ruin your entire day. I will burn this arena to the ground. And that is, again, only within game, not actually threatening people, but saying like, oh, if you attack me, I'm going to kill your creature. Things like that.
So that's why I keep getting kicked out of the tournament venues for violence. Damn.
No, you keep getting kicked out because you're a Winota player. There's a difference.
Hey now. True, but still. Yeah, I mean, it's very important to know how to, not correctly, but like, there's a certain skill behind doing those sort of things. Personally, I use deal making a lot. So that is definitely something I've used a lot. I don't like making threats, but I will do that too sometimes. It's just, a lot of it is just, of course, everything is very table dependent, but, you know, it's very important to sort of set that kind of thing up and at least try and do that kind of thing, because a lot of the times, like, just not telling your opponent anything or just being like silent or anything, like you said, it can cost you percentage points. Like, I'm thinking, for example, I'm resolving a green Suns for 2, and the blue player is like, hey, like, promise me you're not tutoring this and I'll let this resolve, kind of thing. It's like, oh, of course I'm not tutoring my collective. Why would you ever think that? And that also comes down to, you know, you're talking about lying. And at that point, you just go grab the oof. But there's a lot of nuance in it. So,
You see, you talking about deal making and how that's something you enjoy is interesting to me because I hate it. I avoid it at all costs. And if someone tries to make a deal with me, I will often try to either avoid it or subvert it in some way, like kind of partially make it very ambiguous so that I can find ways to get around it. Because I generally dislike lying. And while I will do it to some extent, if I make a firm promise, I will keep it. Well, that form of politics to me is generally avoidable if necessary or possible.
Type who likes, you don't like to make deals because you feel it locks you into something.
Yeah, exactly.
See, I always try and word my deals so I can do whatever I want with it. So, like if there's a Collect Roof and a Notion Thief on the board, and for whatever reason someone can remove the oof but can't remove the Notion Thief, it's like, hey, if you remove the oof, I'll make the Notion Thief not a problem anymore. And then I'll just proceed to try and win. And if I win, Notion Thief's not a problem.
You see, that's the kind of deal I'm more inclined to make. Something where it's like,
Yeah,
oh, you let this tutor resolve, and I'll make sure that this Winota can't get any triggers. And then just go get, like, Thassa's Oracle or something and win on my turn before Winota can trigger. Technically, completely true.
but then people get upset because they weren't expecting that. And it's like, well, you kind of plagued yourself.
Yeah, I never lied to you.
I think that's why wording is so important when you're going to make a deal. See, personally, I'm the opposite. I love making deals and I love playing with the wording so that it's beneficial to me. But I also like Ring. I don't lie. I will never lie if you do something. And if you lie to me once, I will remember that for the rest of our lives. So for me, it's like very interesting to try and word it in a way where it goes the way I do. And I think it's a very interesting puzzle of sorts to be able to work around the deals and work with other people to try and get to an advantage state that's best for you.
Making a deal is a very nuanced thing, like everyone said, not only from a wording aspect, but also a situation aspect. For example, say you have a tutor in hand, and there is a threat on board, and a third player has an opposition agent. In some situations, you can actually make a deal with the player with the oppo to use your tutor and let them tutor up a piece of removal. You can try to make that deal, but it's tricky because you're giving them unlimited access to get one thing out of your deck in most situations. And they could be going for the removal piece that they promised, or they could actually try to go for one of your win cons and win over everything else. Would that be a deal you guys make, do you think?
I have made that deal all of twice, and both times it bit me. So I'm probably not going to be making that deal again in the future.
I am also inclined to not do that. I don't trust people enough, especially when money's on the line.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would have to be a very dire situation. Like if it is like a win on board, sure. But if it's like, oh, they have the potential to win, it's like, no, I need to see this happening. It can't just be like, hey, just to be safe, let me just look through your library and is that a Thorkel I see? I'm gonna just take that. No, I need to see something happening. You need to be like, I'm grabbing a Force of Will from your library. Sure, you can tap my Force of Will, because if not, this ad nauseum is going to resolve and we're going to lose on the spot. But again, wording. It's very important when you're doing something like that to be very, very specific with what you want the person to do.
Mm-hmm. In a situation like that, where you can see the writing on the wall and you're like certain nobody has anything else that can help, I would straight up ask the player with the oppo to show me their hand, prove that they won't win.
And that's tricky because they could choose to show you their hand or they could choose not to. And you're kind of in a standoffish situation where you kind of have to be like, well, if you're not going to do that, I'm not going to do this, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, bit of brinksmanship, just seeing who backs down first. But in that situation, I probably would not back down. Them having the potential to win before the threat is too big of a concern if there's even the slightest chance that the threat could be answered another way and not giving the person a win for free.
Mm-hmm. And one thing to really keep in mind here, and one thing I want to really highlight, is in a tournament setting, you are probably going to be playing with people who you don't know very well. Depending on the scale of the tournament and its location, it could be a local shop where you know people a little bit, or it could be a big event like Oktoberfest or Punt City, where there's over 100 people and you're playing with people who you've never seen and you'll never see again.
In a situation like that, I'm a lot less likely to trust people. If I'm just playing friendlies with like a play group that I'm used to, like obviously I'm way more inclined to do deals or anything. But the potential for lying is so much stronger in like a big event where it's like you don't know the people. And that's just something you have to be aware of when you make deals. You have to measure the possibility of lying and, again, try to use your wording to your advantage. Try to make deals that are advantageous to you. Don't like make a deal you can't win through.
To quote some tournament grinder, I don't remember who, I would absolutely lie for a time twister. Like, if you're never seeing the person again, I would absolutely break any deal if it means winning the finals pod. I could have sworn on my life to not win in my turn, and if I get the opportunity to, and I get, I don't know, $1,000, absolutely. 100%.
And it's tricky too, because you want to keep your word in most
Yeah.
situations, but the temptation's
And
there.
I think most people are like that. Most people want to keep their word, but I wouldn't put it past anybody, even people I know and trust, to lie in that high stakes.
Like, you're in a situation where, in a CDH event, there is no rule for lying. There is no rule that you have to keep your word. So no one is actually holding you to that. It's all based on the honor system. When you're playing more locally, you can at least say to the other person, I am never going to trust you again. And I will make sure every pod we play in together from this moment forward, I will make sure everyone knows what you have done today so that it doesn't happen again. But at a bigger event, that's not a factor because you really probably won't see them again.
See, I'm still back on the I would absolutely lie for a time twister. Like, in the beginning rounds of a tournament, like, I might be inclined to trust someone, but if we get to the finals, like, I will just say things and then completely ignore it. Because, like, if it's a big prize, then, like, yeah, absolutely, I want the prize. And so I kind of expect everybody else to do that too.
To her point of like earlier rounds not being as inclined to, in earlier rounds where there's less pressure, less stakes, I probably wouldn't do anything like major, but I feel like even just like a little lie about like, oh yeah, I can't answer this when you do have some sort of answer just as a way to like sandbag. That's something I'm personally okay with and is far less likely to be punished by I guess, social pressure.
I feel that. And as weird as it sounds, I'm kind of on the opposite end where people are saying, I don't want to lie in those situations for no other reason than I don't want to. Not for any moral code, but I just prefer to be honest in those situations and try to play out from there. And I have been in those situations where probably lying would have benefited me. And it's both helped me and it's hurt me. But that's where I'm at. And it's not necessarily wrong one way or the other, depending on what you want to do with it.
That's fair.
I'm actually the same. I don't hold anyone to any sort of code or anything when it comes to that. If we're playing in friendlies and you lie to me, like, come on. But if we're playing on the line for a big tournament and you lie, it's like, sure, like, understandable. I don't even think like somebody lying in an event like that is unethical at all. Because again, like, it's a time twister. Like, believe me, I of all people know how hard it is to get that expensive of a card.
Looking at the whole thing, whether you do it or not, deal making is something that you are going to come across in your games. Whether you like to is another matter entirely, but you will have to dance with the devil in certain situations to try and play to your outs. There will be times where you'll have to trust a player to intuition for the cards that they say they're going to, and not just for all their combo pieces. There will be times where you'll have to trust someone with one of your tutors, and knowing how to make a good deal, like everyone has said, the wording will be very important to help you get success. And not be obnoxious with it is also very important. And not just this, but also all these interactions. And I think that idea brings us into another topic of politics, which is the misdirection, the redirecting side of things.
This is personally what I shine at the most, and I think a large part of that is due to, as I said earlier, trying to present the pod as a team, try to make everyone feel some camaraderie, as they're far more likely to listen to your redirection, allow themselves to be subverted. And while you're doing all this, you can easily be sandbagging the response yourself and kind of just letting people take care of it for you, even if it's not actually that big of a problem.
You just have to make them believe that it is a threat to give you the window you need to win. But other times, there are real threats that you will have to deal with, and you will have to kind of I don't want to say beat someone over the head with it, but you really have to make them realize what you're seeing too. Because not everyone will recognize what every deck is trying to do and recognize what each deck is really threatening with.
Yeah, having pretty intimate knowledge of decks is very important because someone has no idea what the hell like a Tyam does. You're going to have to walk them through it and tell them exactly when you need to interact. To the point where it's almost as if you're mind slavering people on certain opponents' turns. Like, if I've had many games where I know the exact contents of multiple players' hands and am telling them exactly what spells to cast and when. And that power comes from just very explicitly explaining what needs to happen in order to stop someone else from winning the game.
I am thinking about games where like so I play Cedh mainly, 5-color Cedh, and one of the strengths of that deck is the ability to pivot between win lines. And so I was thinking about a game where the three people I was playing with kind of knew what I was doing, and so they removed a meal early on, and then just for good measure, they exiled my dockside, and then I proceeded to win with a different win line, and they're like, "Wait, you don't have dockside or a meal. How are you winning?" And so I was the one walking them through it. I'm like, "Okay, if you have anything, this is where you would interact. Like, this is what I'm doing." Just to like try and teach them so that way next time they'd be able to do it on their own. And it was just so funny because I was able to win through like 4 pieces of interaction just because of the line I took. And I was like, guys, I told you how to interact and you didn't listen to me.
You see, in a situation like that, I would just shut up. I would not say a single word. I would just put my spells on the stack and let people figure it out.
And I think that's more likely what you'll do in a tournament setting, because I have done that in a tournament setting. Riley, I'm with you. I play Cedh, and the amount of times I've just sat there looking at 3 opponents try to talk about what the heck I'm doing and what the heck they have to do to stop me is wild. Same thing with things like my Vadric deck. If players don't know what you're doing, they're really going to communicate, and you can do one of 2 things in that situation. You can look at them and say nothing, or you can say, no, I'm not the threat. Don't worry about what I have here. Look over there. This is scary.
In a tournament setting, I absolutely would shut up and I'd just like let them deal with it.
I was at Oko, and something that happened was I was playing my Cedh deck, and there was a 4-color deck with a Mayhem Devil. And the Mayhem Devil player was trying to convince another player to sacrifice a permanent to kill my Cedh. And the player with the Mayhem Devil was very far ahead than everyone else. So I had to go into kind of a spiel about how we are united against this 4-color player who is very much ahead of us, and how you don't sacrifice that fetch land to kill my Cedh because we're united against this player. Yes, I am trying to win, but don't do their work for them. Make them remove it if they're worried about it, and you keep to the course. You don't give in to them. We're in this together.
Oftentimes, it's good to point out if someone else is worried about something, then it's probably stopping them from winning, at least when it comes to stacks pieces.
Okay, so one of the funniest things, for a while I used to run Collector Roof in my Cedh list, but it would stop so many of my own lines. And so as soon as I got to the point where I was trying to win, I had to like find ways to kill my own Collector Roof. And like it got to the point where I tried dismembering it and somebody countered my dismember. And then I was like, okay, fine, I'm just gonna go to attack. And they're like, I block it, and I'm like, why? Why?
And you both mentioned stacks pieces, and to be a stacks player in Politic is extra hard because not only are you trying to redirect normally, like a normal player, but you also have to stop players from being stupid and removing your stacks pieces at the wrong time.
Stacks players have a hard life.
Absolutely.
They do. don't remove this rule of law on your main phase and let the turbo player untap and just win. The amount of times I've seen that, it's wild.
Yeah, or like just killing an oppo just to get it gone, and then the next player tutors out a fastest Oracle, and it's like, come on.
Get it ready, but only so you can fetch.
Yeah, there have been plenty of times.
It's not easy being a stacks player.
Even if there's like a stacks piece that is mildly inconveniencing me, like if I have like a couple artifacts out and there's an oof on the table, if someone goes to kill that oof, I'm not letting that happen. I will fight for the other player's oof, even if it means I don't get to use my artifacts. I don't like losing to people removing stacks pieces.
No. And there's a saying, right? You can't play the game for people. You can try your best to convince them to do what you think to be the optimal thing, but at the end of the day, most likely, you're going to throw your hands up and be like, okay, do what you're going to do, for better or worse. And that's kind of where the subtlety of this whole thing comes in, because you could be obnoxious with your campaigning, you could be over the top, or you could use a little bit of tact. And I think being able to use that tact will take you a very long way in this format.
See, like, I feel like a lot of CDH players that have played the game for a while, they like to think of themselves as knowledgeable in the game. And so if you try explaining something that they already know, they're just going to get annoyed at you and not listen, even if you're 100% right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does come with a bit of a drawback in that sense. But like if you're playing with new players and you're like, hey, you don't know what's happening, I do, and you explain it to them, they might be like grateful and they might listen to you in the future, and you could like mislead them. And it's just so nuanced. Even just like, hey, this is probably what they're tutoring for. Hey, this is what I think is going on. Like that's not always the thing to be talking about if you want to help your own case.
It's true, and some people are really against politics, like you said, and they get annoyed and they get obstinate and they don't want to listen to you. So that's why not being too hard on what you're doing is really important. Though at the same time, you know what's really fun? Sitting down at an event, at a table, and just being able to identify a player who may be more suggestible than another CDH player might be, and using that to your advantage.
That's another thing. It's like, I don't want to be discouraging to people about playing CDH and picking it up for the first time, but a lot of CDH players know that like sometimes newer players can be very detrimental to a game, where it's like you were talking about someone destroying a stacks piece at the wrong time, and it's very hard to sort of get to that point where you're good enough at CDH so that you know how to utilize this kind of information. And that's why I think I like, Riley was talking about teaching a player about their deck because they didn't know what to do. I kind of like doing that for newer players, like maybe outside of a tournament situation where it's like, if somebody's new to CDH, this is how you learn. You learn by playing, but if you're new, you can be damaging to a game by playing wrong. So all you can do is practice, and that's why I sort of like more experienced players using politics in a way to sort of help newer players as well. Even outside of being a tool and outside of being a thing you can use to your advantage, it's also something you can use to help other people. So, it's interesting in that way as well.
You can help them help you.
Though, if you're coming to an actual event, I respect you as a player sitting down at the table, no matter what your experience level is. Sometimes I get frustrated with people because of the choices that they make, but I don't look down on people because they're new. And after a game, I will happily explain sort of what things they could do better and have that discussion. But in a game, like, I won't lie to people, but if I'm in a game and I can make someone work for me, regardless of what their experience level is, I take full advantage of that.
Yeah, see, like, after a game happens, like, helping new players identify, like, points where they could have done better, I love doing that. There was a game that I played a couple weeks ago, and a friend of mine was playing Tiamat, the food chain Dream Halls list, and their opening hand was something like Chromox, Lotus Petal, Soul Ring, Ancient Tomb Dream Halls, and they tapped their Chromox for the Soul Ring. And so after they won on their second turn, I pointed out, like, hey, if you use the Ancient Tomb, that could have been a turn 1 win. And that could have meant the difference between someone being able to interact or not. And they were like, oh, I didn't even see that.
And if, like you said, I think Riley earlier, if you see that player again, maybe at another event, that gets you brownie points, and you could kind of plant that seed to help you out later on. Plus, it just makes the format better, of course, but...
Yeah, like, absolutely. If you are helpful and, like, you have a reputation for being a nice opponent and, like, a helpful, kind opponent, people are more likely to listen to you, and so you can garner favor. So you can be like, hey, like, buddy, don't remove my oof. Like, you have a soul ring, they have a wish claw talisman. Like, it's not a good idea, buddy.
Not to be blunt, but if you're just a raging asshole, just in general, I'm never going to listen to you. You could be absolutely correct, but I don't want to listen to you. I don't want to make deals with you. You're kind of just generally unpleasant to be around.
It is, and being able to politic, even if you're, kind of manipulating someone, or even if you're lying to them, if you do it in the right way in terms of a CDH event, it will help you, as opposed to being like that stereotypical, tournament sweaty player who's just a jerk and, actually, that kind of thing.
Speaking of being a jerk, anyone want to talk about priority bullying and that sort of stuff?
We can actually go into our next topic, which is not necessarily priority bullying, but that same vein where it is those ultimatums that we talked about, which could be priority bullying depending on what known information there is, but can look at a lot of different ways. And we just talked about how there's a right way to do politics and not come off as a jerk. It's a lot harder to do with this method because you are directly being standoffish, not necessarily aggressively, but you are making a line between you and another player.
I think there are both right and wrong ways to do this. And that goes entirely back to being overt or subvert about it. If you're very overtly doing something that is just kind of a dick move, like textbook mana bullying, forcing someone to tap in all their lands, that will often lead in someone throwing the game just to spite you and to not let you get your way. But if it's in something like, oh, you sandbagged a counterspell, but because you thought the last person had something and they end up not having it, being like, oh, I sandbagged. Can you tap a land and I'll take care of it? That is still technically priority bullying. However, it's far more acceptable. People won't really get mad about that.
Yeah, we're talking about it's all about how you word things, how you speak to other people.
I would absolutely not tap my land, and I would just let the game end because I don't like people sandbagging.
And that's tricky because if you're in a tournament, that letting another player win just to stand against another player could result in you losing that round. And depending if that's like top 16 or final 4, like we just saw at the most recent Mox Masters, you let another opponent win. I think a card that really highlights this kind of mentality is Chain of Vapor. I've seen a lot of situations, and I'm sure you all have too, where you try to force someone to deal with a threat by Chain of Vaporing one of their value pieces. So not only are you taking away their value, you're also making them sacrifice a land so they don't lose the game.
I think there are situations where that works and that they will actually do it. And that is hitting someone who actively has also been like, yeah, this is a problem, we need to stop it. And then not explicitly saying oh, you need to deal with this, but just cast Chain of Vapor, don't really say anything, hit one of their pieces that's also pretty worrying, and just let them sit with that. Don't say, all right, I'm gonna make you do this. Just let it happen. They'll probably take care of it.
Okay, so I actually had a game a couple days ago where there was a Winota deck with a board full of attackers, and I had a Wishclaw Talisman under somebody else's control, and I had a Chain of Vapor. And I looked at the board, and I bounced the Winota before they moved to combat. The correct play, many would argue, is bouncing the Wishclaw Talisman and forcing the other player to bounce the Winota. However, with Chain of Vapor specifically, I do not fuck around and find out. Like, there are too many games where I have tried to do something like that, or I have tried to, like, bounce my own dockside and then bounce the threat, but then either somebody counters it because they're like, oh, I don't want you to have dockside, we'll just lose, it's fine. So always just bounce the initial threat.
Also, because like they can just send it straight back at you, and like it's probably not good to cast Armageddon
Right.
for just 2 players.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but that's a risk, right? You're trying to, in a way, assert your dominance and be very overt in what you are trying to get done. And I've seen that backfire so hard so many times. And so a gray area in CDH and Magic, or at least Commander as a whole, is when a player casts a spell and they kind of declare the target, but there's that initial conversation where it's like, hey, don't target this. And I say it's a gray area because it's not technically something that is allowed, but it's also something that's not necessarily not allowed. In a CDH event, it depends really on the pod you're with and how they allow that stuff to go down. But having those conversations, if you have a Chain of Vapor, very much looks like, hey, if you target this, I'm just going to let it resolve and I'm not going to deal with the threat. So if you don't want to lose, you're going to deal with the threat. And again, you throw it back at them, and it could be a situation where you say, okay, that didn't work, let me deal with the threat. Or you double down and say, okay, I'm going to do it anyway. And digging your heels in the sand in that situation,
It's dangerous.
it's tricky because you never know how it's going to go. Yeah, it's dangerous.
Also, a thing to mention for your point of how people like kind of soft declare targets. If someone like puts a removal spell, say, on the stack, targeting something that benefits you to be removed, but then the table kind of decides no, and convinces the player to change their targets, call a judge 100% of the time. Like, sure, their play was bad for the table or the rest of the table, but if it benefits you, don't let them do it. And vice versa. If it benefits you for them to change it, don't say a word about a judge. Just let them change it. Let them get the GRV or whatever.
Yeah, but then that gets into like unsportsmanlike conduct where you could have a judge called on you for that. Like if people know you do that, it's like you're kind of being sus.
It could go one way or the other. Some judges will probably say, okay, you can't do that. Some will say, you can reveal the card and have that discussion. I've seen it go both ways, but that does highlight the point that don't be afraid to call a judge. Because, again, you're playing with players and you're not playing with machines. So those things come up. Calling a judge helps in situations like this.
If people are politicking against you, you can absolutely call a judge over and just to monitor for slow play, which they can do to you as well if you're the one politicking, but it's always a tool you have available.
And that actually brings us pretty neatly into our next topic, which is when you're in a tournament, you are in a timed round, at least for the Swiss. So you are playing under a 75 or 90-minute clock, and player conversations take up a lot of that time. So how do you actually politic well under that clock?
Table talk can take up a significant portion of the round.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, hey, if they're plotting against me, I will definitely call a judge for slow play. But if we are plotting to stop someone else, I wouldn't say anything. But I would also expect them to call the judge for slow play.
I know one time I was in a game where it was me trying to stop another player, and me and the player I was trying to stop were both trying to convince a third player who was like saying, should I stop this player? That player being me, because I'm worried they might try to win. And me telling them over and over, no, I'm trying to stop this other player so we don't lose. And that took up like at least half an hour of that turn just for them thinking on what they should do. Not even us trying to convince them just sitting there after each time I cast a spell, being like, should I stop them now? I was like, no. Trying to stop this mono white beats player from killing us. Don't.
Yeah, so one of the things that I particularly really like about playing Cedh, if, depending on the board state, of course, if someone like casts a Dockside and you have a Cedh activation up, you can, in response to their Dockside entering the battlefield, you can like tutor out a Sakashima and get your own Dockside and then win on top of their Dockside trigger, which makes it really difficult for the other players at the table to interact because two people are presenting win conditions at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they stop me, the other player just wins. If they stop the other player, I just win. And so it makes it a very difficult situation for the other players at the table.
Yeah, and in either case, you or the other player can call a judge and call king-making, which is really hard to interact with, but it's a nuanced game, and that's a weird situation.
Ugh, king making is difficult.
It is. And we're going to talk about that a bit more later, but I do want to talk a little bit more about the timer situation. Because there have been people who have come forth and say, politics shouldn't be allowed in CDH. There shouldn't be politics allowed in an event, especially, which I think is impossible to enforce because as long as you have people playing, there's going to be talk. But do you guys think there should be politics in a tournament?
I mean, as someone who heavily engages in them, absolutely. Just be efficient when possible.
I think politics are a very important, I've said a few times, it's a very important thing to use to your advantage. And more importantly, it's just such an inherent part of the format that if you ban it, it's just a different format.
I'm just thinking about how would they even enforce that? Like, if somebody tries, would there be a judge call? That would cause so much extra work for the judges. I personally am not a huge fan of politics at CDH tables, just because usually the politics are against me.
But it's frustrating, right? You're trying to do something and players are just talking. I think I've been in the situation where players keep talking and the clock keeps running down and it kind of stops you from being able to win. Like when there were turns, because I know a lot of events aren't doing turns anymore, you had people kind of taking their time because that's another kind of player aspect of it. We talked about slow play a little bit, but intentionally slow playing to try to run down the clock in your favor, whether it be to make sure you get that extra turn or just to try to make it so it ends in a draw. That's something players have done, and it's kind of looked down upon, but I also know players who are like, I'm just playing to my outs, I'm doing what I need to do to win, or draw, or what have you.
I've certainly played to a draw many times in tournament settings. Sometimes it really is your only way to win, and if that means just not necessarily intentionally talking a lot, but making sure every little minute thing is discussed over so that it leads towards people not winning and taking up more time and letting the game go longer, that is, in my opinion, completely valid and honestly probably should be done more. Draws are good for you.
Yeah, I agree. There's nothing wrong with taking a draw. I don't think there's even anything wrong with not playing a game and just intentionally drawing just to help your standings. Because in a tournament, you're playing for points. You're playing to get to the top 16 and then hopefully the final four. And drawing is just what you have to do sometimes. I've been in plenty of games where we are just sat there looking at the board and knowing that either the game's going to go on forever or we're all in positions where we could try to win and just be like, let's just draw. And you'd be surprised the number of people who have been in really good positions and are just like, yeah, I'm down for a draw. Let's do that.
Just recently, in one of the most recent tournaments I've played in, it was the final round. It was the top pod. 3 of us were live to get top 4, because this was just a cut to top 4, not top 16, and the other player was close to prizing. So someone had a win on board, but we talked it out and agreed that it would be in everyone's best interest just to draw in.
I've been in tournaments before where just the timer is it's nothing's gonna work. You can't win because I have answers. I can't win because you have answers. And the only thing we can do is, okay, let's draw. Let's not waste time. This is beneficial to both of us. I think it's just another aspect of tabletop.
I will say, I don't like intentional slow play, though. I'm totally on board with conversations about having a draw or creating a board state where you ensure the draw, whether it be stacking it out, getting all the control pieces, what have you. But when you are sat there on your turn, taking a minute to do any game action just because you know the clock is ticking down, if you hold out for 2 more minutes, it's going to be a draw. I'm not a fan of that. I think that's kind of scummy behavior.
Yes, that I agree with. When I was talking about that, that was more in intentionally creating political situations to draw on the game.
See, I've been in the position before where like I've been trying to like figure out math-wise like how to do a specific line, and it's taken me like 2 or 3 minutes to be like, okay, this is the line I need to take, this is the order I need to do it, this is how I can win. And then like the first step, like I'm like, okay, cast a dockside, and then it gets countered, and it's like, well, we just wasted 5 minutes. That was great.
I do think there is a difference, though, between thinking out a line and being in a tank. And I think most players will be able to recognize that, especially on a turn when you're actually going for a win. They will be more understanding, but they will also recognize when you're just being kind of a jerk and you can't win, you're just stalling. And I've also been in situations where I've tried to go for a win and my opponents take an hour trying to discuss how to stop me, and we're just sat there, and every action I take is another 10 minutes of discussion on their part.
To circle back to intentional draws, I think that is a very, honestly, good response to kingmaking. I believe it was at the Tier 1 con in a semifinals or finals pond where the players decided to take an intentional draw as one player had complete and total control over who won the game from 2 onboard win conditions. And yeah, just drawing instead of doing that. Where in the case of the semifinals, it was they play a new game, but because they can't draw. But in like even like a Swiss round, that could be a preferable outcome for the table to take.
And we've talked about king making, and it might be good to highlight what exactly king making is. And that's a term that is kind of, I think, misused in the community. The way I view the term is it is when you intentionally is the key part, knowingly and full understanding of what you are doing, take actions to make it so another player wins the game. I think there are a lot of times when players make mistakes or do something not in bad faith, but isn't optimal, that gets labeled kingmaking, and I disagree on that.
In my opinion, depending on the Swiss rounds, depending on how everybody's done, you could be in a position to make top 16 as long as one specific player does not win the pod. And so it would be better overall for your tournament progression to just absolutely destroy that one player. Regardless of if that means you win or somebody else wins, as long as they don't win, you're still advancing to the top 16. And I think that is kind of scummy, but totally acceptable.
And that was one of the questions we brought up before, too. And it's weird, right? Because intentional draws are usually considered okay. And this one, it's not generally seen in the same favorable light, but it has the same result. You're playing to your outs. You are in a tournament trying to get the points you need to advance.
Yeah, there's nothing stopping you from doing it in the rules. So if that is strategically beneficial to you based on the organization of the tournament, it is entirely within your right, in my opinion.
But again, it is kind of scummy, just for the record.
I think kingmaking is very, like most of these topics, is very nuanced because a lot of people will call kingmaking on plays that are just maybe suboptimal, which I've seen happen a lot. I think kingmaking, like you said, has to be very, very intentional. It's happened against me, and it's, of course, very awful when it happens. But again, it's like very hard to tell when something is intentional kingmaking versus just maybe a new player doing a very, very bad move. But I don't know. I don't think you should be kingmaking in general. I mean, I guess if it's like, you're talking about, oh, if this person wins, oh, I can't win, but if this person wins, it's better for me in the standings. Sure, I suppose. But I mean, I don't know. It just always feels bad to screw other people out of their potential thing just to give you the slight up in the standings. But in a tournament setting, some people are just cutthroat. Again, if you're playing for a time twister, like important large amounts of money that you're playing for. So, do what you gotta.
And I've been on the opposite end of this situation where I've been in a pod where it's been two players who need a draw, and I'm sitting there because I need to try to win to get there. And I've been their target because if they kill me, they can just decide to draw.
I think a very good policy to have is if you are eliminated from the game and the game goes to a draw, you do not receive a point, as this very much disincentivizes the pact negation I lose on my turn line, which is not great in my opinion. Like, I can see allowing it to exist, but overall, I don't love it.
See, I'm actually of the opposite opinion where I think that it is something I like because it does make it better for me to play to my outs. If I cast a pact and I know I'm going to not be able to pay for it and lose, but I know I do it in a manner that makes the game go to a draw and doesn't let another player just win outright, I'm totally comfortable with that.
So I have a very specific scenario from a small online tournament I played a couple years ago. I was playing a Yidris deck, and the goal of the deck was to get Hive Mind out and then cascade into the packs. Those that you need to pay for or lose. The goal was to make everybody cast them multiple times, so that way nobody could pay for them, and then you just pass the turn. Everybody dies on their upkeep. So as that was happening, the table started talking about how to target with their packs and like what order they'd resolve in, and try and figure out how to minimize players losing. One person was going down and taking one for the team, and so it felt like they weren't really on board with the idea of me winning, which crazy, right? In a tournament setting.
If I can take one for the team, so to speak, and do it in a way where I make a deal with the other players that the game ends in a draw after that, I'm more inclined to take that deal because if I don't, I lose, and if I do, there's a better chance for me overall benefiting out of the situation somehow. And in a situation like that, it always feels bad, and you have to weigh the pros and the cons for you.
But also, I would never do something like, oh, we can resolve it in this way just so this person doesn't win. It's like, come on. Like, I'm not going to do something if it's like, oh, I don't have a chance to win, but you tried to kill me, so now you don't get to win either. It's like, it's a tournament, dude.
And that's kind of the idea of spite play, right? The idea where you do something to intentionally fuck over another player who did something to upset you. Lightning bolting something of theirs just so you can, just to prove a point. It's messing up their board for no other reason than to mess with them because you want to. Not because it helps you, but because you want to make them suffer. And again, with king making, it is really the intent, I think, that defines it.
Okay, so I have a question then. Would a turn one strip mine be counted as a spite play?
I think that just counts as a bad play.
Again, it's the intent, right? Are you doing it because this other player annoyed you? Then probably. If it's because you want to stop the turbo player from getting a land somehow, and that helps you, go ahead.
I can't think of a single situation in which I would want to do that. Like maybe if I go like strip mine, Mox Diamond, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, it's like sure, but I'm not playing vintage here. I'm not strip mining you turn one, okay? I don't plan on being down a land versus two other players just to mess up a singular player.
I mean, if you're playing Azusa, though, and there's only one person I know who does that, but...
Well, I mean, that's a whole different story. That's, strip mine as a strategy.
But spite plays, again, king making, there's the intent there, right? But that's different than playing to your outs, where you do something in order to increase your chances of winning or drawing. It could be doing a pact, not being able to pay for it, just to try to either bait out counter magic from another player. And I know a lot of people said like they would block a creature when you are dead on board, and I agree with that. If you are attacking into me, you are opening yourself up for blockers. You are. On the other hand, though, another player might just call you blocking like that spite play because you're just killing their creature because you're dead. I was playing a game where one player had a Wandering Archaic, and another player who was really far behind didn't have much going for them. So a third player cast a spell that was going to stop the Wandering Archaic player from winning. So the Wandering Archaic player cast a counter spell. The other player, who was far behind, actually cast a pact from their hand, not being able to pay for it, but they made it so the Wandering Archaic player could copy it with their creature and counter the pact. And the Wandering Archaic player got upset because they were saying, oh, you can't do this. This is just spite play. You can't pay for it. And I actually jumped in and said, no, they're making it so you have to copy the spell and then use your resources on your turn so you don't lose the game. And then, so where do you all draw the line between kingmaking or spite play versus playing for outs?
If it actually benefits you to do so and is not due to specifically like ill intent, I think it's completely fine. If there's any sort of ill intent or favoritism involved, that's just being a fucking dick. Don't do that.
Yeah, for me, I like to look for people with the ability to explain their decision. I mean, I'm not going to like grill you for like, why did you mental mist on my soul ring? Why did you do that? It's like, yeah, this move looks a little strange, but I think it's going to benefit me, and not like, oh, you blew up my creature, so I decided to specifically blow up your creature instead of the active Cedh smile.
If there is a line of reasoning that is sound.
I was watching a game one time where a player cast a Wheel of Fortune with another player having a Notion Thief on the field. And the other players actually got upset to the point that they called a judge, saying that it was kingmaking. But the player casting the wheel actually was able to explain, no, I'm doing this so that the other two players identify the player with the Notion Thief as the threat. They were doing it so all the focus and resources had to go to stopping that player, and the player who casts the wheel would be allowed to sit back and not be the focus. And times like that, there are gambles that players take. Sometimes a player does something thinking it will or hoping that it will benefit them, but there's the coin flip that it just doesn't happen, and it just helps another player win the game. So I do have one other question. If you are eliminated from a game and there are other players still playing, would you interject into that game? Would you still sit there and talk about the board state?
Absolutely not. And if someone from outside the game is doing that, I would politely ask them to shut up. Outside influence of players not alive and playing in the pod. I'm not sure if it's illegal, but it definitely should be if it's not.
Gaining outside assistance is against the rules, so that's an immediate no-go. If somebody does that, I would call a judge.
Yeah, that is another situation where it's like, that's not politics. That's not playing your advantage. Like, it doesn't matter if somebody is like, if somebody wins, you get an advantage. Well, yeah, I don't care. Like, if you're out, you're out. Like, just watch. Just watch a game because you're out.
See, like in some friendly games, if I get eliminated early, I'll just like be talking with the table, and like some people will show me their hands, and it's like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. But like, since I'm out of the game, I can't share any information with anyone. I can't give assistance, and so you are just a spectator. You don't say anything about what's going on in the game.
Yeah, even in friendlies, that kind of thing would make me mad if somebody interjects into the game. Like, I have had friendlies where somebody's like, oh, why are you not dealing with this? Or why are you not doing It's like, you're not involved in the game. Let people just play. CDH, I think, is a format about learning yourself. And I think just having somebody give outside assistance just sort of ruins any aspect of competitiveness that is in the format. I want to play against you and not you plus your friend who really doesn't like that I'm sitting there with an opposition agent and hey, maybe you should kill that.
Oh, I agree. And I think if people have friends there, that's totally different. But I have seen people say that if you were the fourth member of a pod and you die first, that you are still an active member of that pod. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's a point of thought I've seen in the community.
I disagree with you being an active member of the pod because at no point after you have been eliminated are you considered the active player.
I would agree with that, actually, yeah. But I do have another question. If you catch a glance of another player's hand, you're not intentionally looking, but players can be a little bit loose on how they handle their hands, and they do something called hand bleed, where they might turn their hand a little too much, and you catch a glimpse if you're sitting next to them. If you see something in their hand, do you bring it up to the rest of the table?
Absolutely not.
Nah. Even like for the purpose of being fair, like that's my information.
Yeah, I just straight up don't notice I've seen it. Like, I certainly wouldn't tell other people. Like, I feel bad that I've seen it, but what am I going to do? Forget about it? Like,
I've been in the situation where I've seen the people sitting next to me, I've seen their hands, and I see a counterspell or a swords to plowshares, and I was planning on winning that turn through a particular line. I will still go for that line and play into that interaction because I should not have that information.
I actually find that point, Riley, very interesting. Just because it's hard, like Bones said, and you have that information, so it's very hard not to make choices based off of that. So would you ever be in a situation, everyone, where you see someone has a win? Would you try to politic with the table and say, this player could have this in their hand, this is something we have to look out for?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it depends on board state. Like, if it's like they have a Kiki Jiki on the board, it's like, yeah, hey guys, maybe we shouldn't let active Kiki Jiki sit on the board. I might be less likely to do that if I accidentally see their hand and they have like a Zealous Conscripts or something. But I'll still like be like, hey, Kiki Jiki sitting on the board right there, kind of a problem. Mostly it depends on what the board state looks like and not just, oh, I know that they have Thoracle and Call Tilt in their hands, so I'm going to be like, hey guys, what if this player who's done nothing for 5 turns had Thoracle Consult exactly?
Yeah, see, like, if they have an intuition and an LED in hand, and I see that, but they don't have anything else on the board to indicate that they're going to win, I wouldn't say anything, and I would just look at my hand and hope I have interaction. But, like, if they have a food chain and a Kiki Jiki or something, then it's like, hey, if they have a creature in hand, they could win. And that is much more likely. And so I would probably mention something like, hey, we should probably deal with this. But if it's, again, like a Thoracle Console or a win attempt where there's nothing to indicate that they're trying to win, I wouldn't say anything.
What if you're in a situation where a player tries to priority bully you? And we've talked about priority bullying a little bit, but just to highlight it again, priority bullying is when a player passes priority on a spell in order to force another player to use interaction, even if they have interaction in hand. So, say a player tries to priority bully you, and you have seen that they have an answer in their hand. What do you do in that situation?
They fucked around and found out.
Seconded. Guess I'm passing. Like, of course, I'd like to sort of have that conversation before they try in the pass priority, because I am someone who would let them know I am not topping out. If you pass to me, I don't have the answer. I'm passing. So I think it does depend on, pre-priority pass discussion. But in general, if you reveal interaction, pass, say tap out and I'll interact, and I don't have the interaction, I'm just passing.
I would let them lose just because I dislike priority bullying that much.
Interesting. Okay. Another question. Different topic. Another player is going for a win. Another player intuitions for a counterspell, but they also get 2 pieces of a breach combo, let's say Zavine's Reclamation and Underworld Breach. If there's no other known interaction at the table, do you give them the counterspell, knowing that they can stop the other player, but might win on the next turn?
Absolutely not. You give them whatever it is that doesn't let them win or stop the win. If they tutor for a greedy combo, they should have tutored for Pact of Negation, Mind Break, Trap, and Force of Will. That's on them.
See, in that scenario, I might actually give the counterspell. I think I'm more willing to bet that somebody else has interaction, or if I have interaction for that upcoming player's turn.
I'm with Bones here.
It's kind of weird, right? Because you can make arguments for king making either way, despite me not thinking it's correct either way. But it's like, if you give them the counterspell, it's like, oh, well, now they're really set up for their next turn. But if you don't give them the counterspell, you can just lose on the spot. So again, I think that's something that requires more conversation. You need to know some form of security. If nobody else has interaction for the ongoing combo, you have to give them the counterspell or we just lose.
Again, a lot of nuance, a lot of necessity to understand board state, which is tricky because you have to make a lot of split-second decisions sometimes. And like we highlighted at the start of this, a good player will be able to navigate these complex social environments to create the scenario that's best for them for winning. However, I do want to highlight one important fact that this is a game. Yes, there are stakes on the line in a tournament, and it's okay to be upset, be frustrated by how a game went, especially if a player does something like throw a game, but you never want to take it too far. You never want to berate that opponent after the game. You never want to let the frustration get the better of you. If you want to carry a grudge into the next game, if you ever play with that player again, that's another matter. But don't take those frustrations out of the game against the other player, because that's just going to result in you overreacting, doing something drastic, a lot of hurt feelings, possibly a DQ depending on the situation. So just be mindful of how you conduct yourself, because like we said at the start, how you conduct yourself is very important because it affects how other players will view you going forward.
Something someone told me very early on into playing Magic was that after a game, if you feel frustrated or upset or angry, regardless of the outcome of the game, you lost that one. Magic is supposed to be fun. You are supposed to enjoy playing it.
I agree. And on the other end too, don't be a jerk. Don't go into a game being a jerk just to try to throw people off. Yes, you can play your outs. Yes, you can lie, but there's still a line that you can cross that makes you into a jerky player. But thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed these conversations. Again, there's no one definitive answer for a lot of these topics that we discussed. So feel free to let us know what you thought down below in the comments. Share your own takes, share your own stories. Let us know what these things mean to you. Thank you so much to Ring, Bones, and Riley for joining me, and we will be seeing you all soon.
Bye!